The echo of his Italian leather shoes against the polished marble floor was the only sound in the vast, dimly lit hallway of the mansion, until a sudden blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. It came from upstairs, a young girl's voice. His daughter, Zaya. The sound cut through the air like a razor, shrill and panicked, unlike anything he had ever heard before. The millionaire froze for half a second, his pulse spiking with dread. He had heard cries before. Tears from nightmares, frustration from school, the occasional slammed door. But this was different. This was terror. Pure, primal terror. Without thinking, he sprinted toward the grand staircase, his heart thundering louder than his footsteps. Zaya! He shouted, rounding the curve of the stairs, grabbing the mahogany banister with such force it burned his palm. Another scream rang out, even more desperate, muffled now, as if she was being silenced. Adrenaline surged through his veins. He shoved open her bedroom door, his breath catching as he took in scene. The plush pink room was in chaos, pillows strewn across the floor, a lamp knocked over, and in the far corner, Zaya curled up, shaking, eyes wide with unspeakable fear. Standing over her, back turned, was one of his longtime employees, Stephen, the estate manager. The man was clutching something metallic in his hand, something that glinted under the soft light. The millionaire didn't even pause to process. He tackled Stephen to the ground with a force that surprised even himself, the two men crashing into a dresser. "What the hell are you doing?" he bellowed, punching wildly, protecting his daughter with a ferocity he'd never known he had. Zaya was screaming again, now sobbing, calling out his name, not in fear this time, but in pleading desperation. He turned to her as Stephen groaned beneath him. "It's okay, baby, I'm here," he said, voice cracking as realization dawned like a slap. Something had been terribly wrong in his home, right under his nose. And tonight, he'd almost lost the only person who had ever truly mattered. 6 months earlier, the millionaire sat alone at a gala table dressed in a custom-tailored tuxedo, swirling aged whiskey in a crystal glass as a sea of politicians, socialites, and celebrities mingled under chandeliers dripping in wealth. But despite the flashing cameras and laughter, he felt nothing. Emptiness had long replaced emotion in his chest. His billions couldn't buy what he had long buried: connection. A brief toast from a charity representative interrupted his thoughts, followed by a slideshow of children in foster care. One slide stopped him cold: a 10-year-old black girl named Zaya, sitting on the edge of a bed in an underfunded group home. Her eyes weren't pleading. They were quiet, numb, like she'd given up on ever being seen. Something inside him stirred, an ache he hadn't felt since his mother passed. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was the echo of his own neglected childhood. Whatever it was, he couldn't stop looking at her face. The next morning, his assistant entered his office with confusion written all over her face. "Sir, you want to start adoption proceedings?" "For her." He barely looked up from the girl's file. "Yes, immediately." It was impulsive, reckless even. His friend scoffed. "You're trying to buy a soul," one joked. "Is this your latest charity project?" Another sneered. But he ignored them. For once, his actions weren't about headlines or legacy. They were about something he couldn't name. And within 3 weeks, the paperwork was done. Zaya stood at the door of his mansion, suitcase in hand, guarded eyes watching everything and nothing. She was small, her braids tight, her shoes worn out. The staff exchanged uncertain glances. He bent down to shake her hand, awkward, formal. "Welcome home," he said. She gave a small nod, clutching her worn journal like it held her entire world. He showed her to her room, pink walls, stuffed animals, everything a designer thought a girl might like. But she didn't smile. That night, as he reviewed market reports in his office, he glanced at the hallway security monitor. She sat on her bed, legs tucked, writing in her journal, no emotion on her face. The silence between them stretched into the next day. And the next. She ate meals quietly, answered questions in one-word replies, never met his eyes. But she watched him, not with affection, with caution, as if waiting for something, rejection maybe, the kind she knew too well. He had built empires, outmaneuvered billionaires, and sat across presidents. But this little girl's silence, unnerved him. Still, he was determined not to be a perfect father, he didn't know how, but to be present, to keep her safe, even if she never trusted him. He didn't know then that trust would be earned in fire, not in fancy bedrooms or lavish gifts, but through battles neither of them were ready for. Battles already creeping toward them, hidden in the shadows of his perfect world. The first morning in her new home, Zaya woke up before the sun. The room was warm, the bed too soft, the silence unnatural. It smelled of vanilla candles and luxury, not the stale mildew she had grown used to. She sat up slowly, eyeing the stuffed animals arranged neatly on the chair, the massive closet full of clothes with tags still attached, and the untouched bookshelf of carefully selected titles. It all looked like a magazine cover, perfect and unreal. She reached for her journal and began to write, as she always did, before her voice could betray her fears. Downstairs, the staff moved like shadows. Everyone had a role. The chef prepared gourmet meals, the housekeeper fluffed pillows in rooms no one entered, and Stephen, the estate manager, hovered like a ghost, watching everything, especially her. She noticed. Everyone was polite but stiff. They spoke around her, not to her. The girl, she heard someone whisper, "I give it a month." She kept her eyes low and her words few. The millionaire, Mr. Lawson, she still called him, had left early for a meeting, his suit crisp and voice clipped. "Make sure she's comfortable," he told his assistant, barely glancing her way. He was gone before she could even say good morning. Zaya wandered the mansion slowly, almost suspiciously. Every room had a story she didn't understand. Why were there so many couches? Why were there 4 dining areas? In the east wing, she discovered a small sunroom filled with plants. There, she met Martha, an older black maid with kind eyes and no pretense. Martha didn't ask questions. She simply offered tea and a blanket and told Zaya to come back anytime. It was the first warmth she'd felt since arriving. That night at dinner, Zaya sat across from Mr. Lawson at a comically long dining table. He scrolled through his phone as the chef served a dish she couldn't pronounce. She pushed the food around her plate. He looked up once. "Is it okay?" he asked. She nodded. Then silence. Cold, echoing silence. When she excused herself, he didn't stop her. Back in her room, she stared out the window at the city lights blinking below. Somewhere out there, kids her age were laughing, making mistakes, being normal. But she was trapped in a castle, not a home. She missed the noise of the group homes, the chaos, even the fights. At least there, she knew the rules. Here, she didn't know who she was supposed to be. A daughter? A project? A symbol? So she wrote it all down. Page after page. The mansion was beautiful, but she felt invisible. No one asked her about her favorite food. No one noticed when she left a meal untouched. And Mr. Lawson, her new father, was more like a statue in a suit than a man, but she watched him too, from behind corners and down long hallways. She saw how he clenched his jaw when talking to his board members, how he never smiled, how he stayed up late staring at a single photo of a woman she assumed was his mother. There was a sadness in him she recognized. Maybe he was just as lost as she was, but she didn't trust him. Not yet. Not in a world that had only ever taken things away from her. Not in a home that felt like a gilded cage. Days bled into weeks, and though the mansion never lacked food or amenities, it lacked something Zaya couldn't put into words: belonging. She became a ghost in the halls, floating between rooms, watching the world function around her like clockwork. But unlike the gears in Mr. Lawson's luxury watches, she never felt like she fit. Her footsteps were too soft to be noticed, her words too few to echo back. Still, she observed everything. She noticed how the staff stiffened when Mr. Lawson entered room, how Stephen always seemed to watch her with cold, calculating eyes, and how Martha was the only person who genuinely smiled when she walked in. It was Martha who broke the invisible wall first. One rainy afternoon, Zaya found herself in the greenhouse again, curled up with her journal. Martha brought her a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, cut diagonally just like Zaya liked. "Didn't think anyone here ate normal food," Zaya mumbled, surprised. Martha chuckled. "Honey, This place is big on style, not on soul. Zaya raised her eyebrow. You're different, she whispered. Martha nodded knowingly. So are you. They started spending more time together, potting flowers, baking cookies, or just talking. Martha listened, never pushing. One afternoon, Zaya quietly opened up. She spoke of foster homes that smelled like bleach and fear, of nights spent pretending to sleep so she wouldn't be moved again, of a social worker who always said, "We'll find you a forever home," like it was a scripted line. Martha wiped her hands on her apron and looked Zaya in the eyes. Baby, sometimes people adopt kids to heal themselves. Doesn't mean they don't care, it just means they don't know how yet. Zaya didn't reply, but her grip on her journal loosened. She started sketching little things, flowers, rooms in the mansion, even a rough sketch of Mr. Lawson at his desk. She didn't understand why, but there was something about the way he sat so still, so stiff, that made her want to draw it. Mr. Lawson, for his part, was beginning to notice her presence in subtle ways. One morning he paused when he saw the drawing she left accidentally on the kitchen counter, a sketch of Martha and herself laughing over teacups. He held it for a moment longer than he should have before slipping it back. He started asking soft questions. How was school? Did you finish that drawing? But his attempts felt foreign, like he was rehearsing from a script. Still, he was trying. The cracks began to show during a dinner meeting with investors at home. Zaya wandered into the dining room, barefoot, holding her sketch pad. The guests stiffened when they saw her, an unannounced, black child in a room full of white millionaires. One of them asked, pretending to joke, "Is she the new marketing strategy?" Zaya froze. Mr. Lawson's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. She turned and left without a word. That night, she didn't eat dinner. She barely looked up from her journal. Later, as she lay awake, she replayed the moment over and over. Not because of what the man had said, but because her father didn't say anything at all. The silence, once again, was louder than any insult. And in that silence, Zaya's walls slowly began to rise again, brick by brick, word by word, written into her journal like armor. She had started to trust just a little, but now the cracks had returned, and they were threatening to break everything before it even began. Zaya had always been the new kid. New name tags, new teachers mispronouncing her name, new kids asking the same old questions. But nothing had prepared her for Westridge Academy, the elite private school Mr. Lawson enrolled her in, a place where the tuition alone cost more than most people's yearly salaries. The students arrived in luxury cars, wore designer jackets, and carried expensive phones. Zaya, despite her new clothes and shiny new backpack, still felt like an outsider the moment she stepped through the gates. Her skin tone stood out. Her braids, her quiet nature, her very presence. It all seemed to bother them before she even opened her mouth. At first, the comments were subtle. "Where'd you transfer from?" said with a smirk. "Oh, you're his daughter?" asked with a tone that made her stomach twist. Then it escalated. In the cafeteria, a blonde girl named Camille made a cruel joke. "Did he buy you from the charity auction or something?" Laughter followed. Zaya didn't react. Not on the outside. But she stopped eating her lunch that day. The next day, someone accidentally spilled milk on her chair before she sat down. Another day, a boy called her ghetto during art class. When she raised her voice to defend herself, the teacher didn't ask what happened. She pulled Zaya aside and said, "You need to work on your attitude." That night, Zaya sat in silence at the dinner table while Mr. Lawson scrolled through his phone. He glanced up once. "How's school?" She looked at him, her mouth opening, then closing. "Fine," she lied. She didn't know how to explain it. She didn't think he'd understand. What would a white billionaire know about being looked at like a stain on perfect linen? But deep down, she wished he'd ask again. With intention, with care. The bullying continued. Her journal became darker, her drawings sharper. Girls with faceless heads, pages filled with scribbles and words like empty, fake, alone. The only thing that made her feel seen was Martha, who noticed the bruises she didn't talk about and the slumped posture Zaya tried to hide. One evening, Martha found her in the greenhouse, curled up behind the tall ferns, crying silently. "I'm tired," Zaya whispered, "I try to be invisible, and they still hate me." Martha pulled her into her arms. "They hate what they don't understand, baby, but don't you ever disappear for them." It should have been Mr. Lawson hearing that, but he was never around. Or, when he was, he asked the wrong questions. "Do you like your classes? Are your grades okay?" Surface level concern wrapped in expensive suits. Zaya wanted him to notice what was unspoken, the shrinking in her shoulders, the fake smiles, the quiet tears. But he didn't. Not yet. One day, she came home with a busted lip. She said she fell. Martha didn't believe her. Later, Zaya sat alone in her room, sketching a girl with wings trying to escape a glass cage. Below it, she wrote, "I don't think I belong anywhere." That night, Mr. Lawson passed her open door. He saw her hunched over, her light off, only the desk lamp glowing over pages of drawings filled with pain. He paused but didn't enter. The moment passed, and with it, another crack deepened, not in her, but between them. A father and daughter, living in the same home, breathing the same air, but speaking entirely different languages of pain. Neither of them knew it yet, but something had to give, and it would very soon. It started like any other evening. Quiet, distant, and colorless. The kind of evening where the house was too clean, the dinner too perfectly plated, and the conversation too hollow to mean anything. Zaya sat across the long marble table from Mr. Lawson, barely touching her food, arms crossed, her journal clenched tightly in her lap. He was halfway through discussing quarterly profits to no one in particular, barely looking at her as he cut his steak with robotic precision. But tonight, something inside Zaya was boiling, rising, pushing against the dam she'd built for months. And then he made the mistake of asking the one question that tipped it all over. "Did you say thank you to the driver for dropping you off today?" Zaya's fork dropped with a loud clang. Her eyes shot up, finally meeting his. "That's what you care about?" "If I said thank you to the driver," she snapped. Mr. Lawson blinked, surprised. "It's just manners, Zaya. Don't speak to me like that." But she was already standing. "Manners? You don't even ask how I'm doing. You don't know anything. You never even look at me unless I'm doing something wrong." Her voice cracked mid-sentence, years of rejection pouring out in ragged breaths. "Do you know what it's like to sit alone at lunch every day? To be treated like a mistake in your perfect world? To be talked about like I'm just some charity case you picked up to ease your guilt?" His jaw tightened. "That's not true. I gave you a home. You gave me a cage," she screamed, slamming her hands against the table. "You don't care about me. You just didn't want to feel alone anymore. But you don't want me. You want something you can fix, like your investments. I'm not an investment." He stood now, too, the tension in the room electric. "Zaya, you're crossing a line." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "You'll never be my father. And I'll never be your daughter." She grabbed her journal and ran from the room, her footsteps echoing down the corridor like a ghost fleeing a haunted castle. Mr. Lawson stood there, frozen, unsure whether to chase after her or let her go. He felt ashamed. Not angry. Not insulted. Ashamed. Because somewhere in the storm of her words, he'd heard the truth. A truth he had refused to acknowledge from the moment he signed those adoption papers, that loving a child wasn't about providing, it was about presence. And presence wasn't something he could outsource. He sat down slowly, staring at her untouched plate across from him, his appetite gone. For the first time in years, the silence in his home felt earned. Heavy. Alive. Like it was holding a mirror up to his soul. Later that night, unable to sleep, he passed by her room. The door was locked. He stood outside for a moment, listening. No sobs, just the faint sound of pages turning. Her journal, he assumed. Her real voice. One she had trusted more than she trusted him. In his study, he poured himself a drink and stared at an old photograph of his mother, the only person who had ever seen through him. She would have known what to say. She would have told him that walls built from grief can't raise a child, that money couldn't buy redemption, and that the girl sleeping just down the hall didn't need another cold guardian. She needed a man brave enough to admit he'd failed and start over. What he didn't know was that Zaya, behind that locked door, had just drawn a picture of a man with a broken watch, sitting in a room full of gold, but looking out the window at a little girl who was walking away. Below the drawing, she had written one sentence. He only noticed when it was almost too late. The next morning, the mansion felt different. The usual click of polished shoes, the murmurs of staff, the routine perfection. It was all still there, but muted. Mr. Lawson sat at the breakfast table, untouched toast on his plate, his coffee going cold. For the first time since Zaya moved in, he wasn't thinking about board meetings, profit margins, or the next acquisition. He was thinking about the look in her eyes when she screamed at him. That look, wounded, defiant, raw, haunted him. He didn't see her that morning. Or at lunch. When he asked Martha, she simply said she's not ready. Her tone held no judgment, just quiet truth. He nodded. For once, he didn't argue. Later that evening, he found himself lingering outside the sunroom where Zaya and Martha usually sat. The door was slightly ajar. He saw Martha gently braid Zaya's hair while the girl stared out the window, silent. You know, Martha said softly, sometimes people hurt others not because they don't care, but because they've forgotten how to show it. Zaya didn't respond. Martha continued, Your father, he's been broken a long time, baby. Doesn't mean you're not worth fixing for. The words hit him like a punch to the chest. He stepped back before they noticed him and retreated to his study, where he opened her adoption file again. Not to review documents this time, but to see her favorite color, her art teacher's notes, a photo of her from age 7, her eyes just as guarded as they were now. He felt a lump rise in his throat. She wasn't just a file, or a project. She was a person, one who had survived more than he ever would. That night, he knocked on her door. Gently. No answer. He tried again. Zaya. It's me, he paused. It's Lawson. Still nothing. I just want to talk. I know I don't deserve it yet, but I'm going to try anyway. After a long silence, the door cracked open. She didn't speak, just looked at him, arms crossed. He held out a small, wrapped package. I noticed you're always drawing. I thought maybe you'd like real charcoal pencils and sketch paper. She took it wordlessly, eyes flicking up to him for the briefest second. Thanks, she murmured. That one word felt bigger than any business deal he'd ever closed. Over the next few days, he began to change, not with grand gestures, but with consistency. He started driving her to school himself, fumbling with the navigation system and laughing awkwardly at his own mistakes. He sat with her during dinner and asked about her art, her classes, even her favorite snacks. When she said she liked strawberry Pop-Tarts, he stocked 3 boxes in the pantry. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes she still ignored him. Sometimes he said the wrong thing. But he stayed, and that mattered. One Saturday, they visited a small museum. She walked slowly, carefully, absorbing every brushstroke. In one corner, they stood before a painting of a black girl surrounded by wolves, yet standing tall. She's not scared, Zaya whispered. She's used to being alone. Mr. Lawson looked at the painting, then at her. She's stronger than anyone realizes, he said. For the first time, she smiled. That night, she added a new drawing to her journal. A man in a business suit sitting on a bench next to a little girl holding a sketch pad. They weren't talking, but they were both smiling. Below it, she wrote, Maybe broken things can be built again. She didn't know it yet, but her heart had started to shift, and so had his. Just as the bond between Zaya and Mr. Lawson began to quietly strengthen, something darker was taking shape behind the walls of their pristine estate, something neither of them saw coming. While Zaya's journal began to hold more hopeful sketches, and Lawson started spending less time in his office and more time at the dinner table, one set of eyes never looked away from them. Stephen, the estate manager. Stephen had worked for Lawson for over a decade, managing the property, overseeing staff, and silently observing every inch of the mansion like a sentinel. But beneath the calm, polished exterior lay resentment. Stephen had never liked Zaya's presence. He never said it aloud, he didn't have to. It showed in the way he double-checked behind her, the way he forgot to include her favorite snacks on grocery lists, and how he always corrected her tone like she was a servant rather than a child. But there was something more dangerous at play. Over the years, Stephen had grown too comfortable in the house, too familiar with the systems. He had access to everything, from Lawson's financials to his private correspondence. He had been quietly siphoning money for over a year, laundering small sums from Lawson's investments through shell vendors listed as property expenses, and now, with Lawson distracted, finally invested in something other than profits, Stephen felt the pressure tighten. Zaya noticed it first. She didn't trust easily, but her instincts were sharp. One evening, she passed the office and saw Stephen hunched over Lawson's desk, quickly minimizing something on the computer when he noticed her. "You shouldn't be in this wing," he said coldly, as if she were trespassing. She muttered an apology and walked away, but something fell off. Days later, while looking for a sketch pencil in a hallway closet near the office, she found a manila envelope tucked beneath a stack of old files. Inside, fake invoices with the same signature repeated over and over. Sloppy. She didn't understand exactly what it meant, but she knew it was wrong. She tried to tell Mr. Lawson that night. "I saw Stephen doing something weird in your office." Lawson, half distracted by an email, looked up. "He probably just needed something. Stephen's worked for me longer than anyone." "But I found Zaya," he interrupted gently. "I appreciate you noticing. But he's family to this house. I trust him." The sting was immediate. Zaya nodded, retreating behind her eyes again. She stopped mentioning it after that. Stephen, however, noticed her growing curiosity. One evening, when Zaya was sketching alone in the sunroom, he approached. "You like to poke around places you don't belong," he said, voice calm but cold. She stiffened. "Just stay in your lane, girl. This place isn't yours to question." He walked away without waiting for a reply. Her hands trembled as she resumed sketching, but the picture she drew now was sharp, angry, of a shadow with a snake's tongue and the words, "Not everything quiet is safe." The next few days were uneasy. Zaya became quieter again. She avoided the office, avoided Stephen. But she also started hiding her drawings, writing less in her journal, keeping her guard up. Lawson noticed, but couldn't pinpoint the reason. He thought maybe their progress had simply plateaued, until the night it all shattered. Zaya wandered into the office to return a sketchbook she'd borrowed from Lawson's study. The room was dark, but she flicked on the desk lamp, only to find Stephen sitting there again, looking through files that weren't his. This time she didn't freeze. "You're stealing," she whispered. He turned slowly, his expression colder than she'd ever seen. "I suggest," he said, rising, "you forget what you think you saw, or it won't end well." That was the moment Zaya knew. This man wasn't just unfriendly. He was dangerous, and she wasn't safe anymore. Not in that house. Not with him watching. Not if no one believed her. The scream came just after 8:30 p.m. Mr. Lawson had just returned from a brief investor dinner, distractedly removing his tie in the foyer when the piercing cry rang through the mansion. It wasn't muffled or hesitant. It was raw, full of panic, cutting through the walls like a knife. "Zaya." Without thinking, he bolted. The echo of his footsteps on the marble staircase bounced like gunshots as he charged up to her room. He hadn't heard her scream like that, ever. Not even during the worst of their distance. This wasn't a nightmare. This was now. "Zaya," he shouted as he reached the door and threw it open. What he saw would stay with him for the rest of his life. His daughter, was curled up in the corner of her room, arms wrapped protectively around her sketchbook, face pale, and eyes wide in terror. And standing over her, leaning down, was Stephen, his long-time trusted employee, his friend. Stephen's hand was clutching her arm, the other holding a silver flash drive. His eyes snapped toward Lawson like a snake caught mid-strike. For a split second, no one moved. Then Lawson lunged. He tackled Stephen with a roar that didn't sound human. They crashed into the dresser with a deafening thud, knocking over a lamp and scattering glass across the floor. "Get away from her." Lawson bellowed, fists flying, adrenaline drowning out every rational thought. Stephen struggled, shouting, "You don't understand. She was snooping. She's ruining everything." But Lawson didn't hear him. Couldn't. All he saw was Zaya's terrified face, the child he had failed to protect, now looking at him like a lifeline. "Zaya, get out of the room," he gasped between punches. "Go, now." She hesitated, trembling, but backed out the door as Stephen shoved Lawson hard, scrambling for the fallen flash drive. Sirens were already on their way. Zaya had hit the panic button on her wristwatch just moments before Lawson arrived. Within minutes, police swarmed the property. Stephen was handcuffed and led away, shouting accusations. "She framed me. I was loyal. She's the liar." Zaya sat on the steps of the front porch, arms around her knees, shaking in Martha's embrace. Lawson knelt before her, bruised and bloodied, eyes filled with panic and regret. "Zaya," he choked, "I'm so sorry. I should have listened. I didn't believe you. I let him, but she interrupted him. You came," she whispered. "You didn't ask questions. You just came." And in that moment, a shift happened, not just in Lawson's heart, but in hers. Because for the first time since entering that mansion, she felt protected, not tolerated, not observed, loved. Inside, the police gathered the evidence: flash drives, forged invoices, falsified accounts, more than enough to bury Stephen legally. But none of that mattered to Lawson in that moment. He wasn't thinking about lawsuits, headlines, or board meetings. He was thinking about the bruises on Zaya's wrists, the fear in her voice, the way she had screamed for him, and how close he had come to not being there. That night, the house was quiet again, but not the old, cold kind of quiet. This one was different, tired, heavy, full of things unsaid, but no longer hidden. In her room, Zaya clutched her sketchbook to her chest. On the final page, she had drawn something new: a man kneeling before a crying girl, not trying to fix her, not trying to explain, just there, present, real. Below it, she wrote, he finally saw her. The morning after the incident, the mansion was a crime scene wrapped in luxury. Yellow tape stretched across Stephen's office. Detectives moved in and out like silent ghosts, and staff members whispered in tight corners, their polished shoes making no noise on the expensive hardwood. Reporters camped outside the gates, hungry for a headline. Millionaire's adopted daughter attacked by trusted employee. It was all over the news by noon. But inside, Zaya sat on a hospital bed, her hands trembling as a nurse gently checked her vitals. She hadn't spoken since the ambulance arrived. Her sketchbook sat closed beside her. Not even Martha could get her to respond. Mr. Lawson sat across the room, a hollow version of the man the world knew. No suit, no phone, no polished confidence, just a father shattered. The detective's words still rang in his ears. The evidence she found saved you millions. She was brave. She didn't panic. She protected you when you didn't protect her. That truth burned. Stephen, meanwhile, was sitting in a jail cell, smug despite the handcuffs. His statement to the police was simple: I did what needed to be done. She didn't belong in that house. He forgot who made him. But the court of public opinion was already boiling. Social media exploded, some condemning Mr. Lawson for neglect, others questioning the safety of adopted children in privileged households. His advisors begged him to stay silent, to distance himself from the scandal. Release a neutral statement. Say you had no idea. Let your legal team take it from here, one of them said over the phone. Lawson looked at Zaya through the hospital window, her small frame curled up beneath a too-white blanket, staring blankly at the wall. No, he replied flatly. This isn't going to be buried. He walked into her room, slowly, sat beside her. You were right, he whispered. I should have listened. I should have seen you. I failed, and I won't let this house, this name, or my silence fail you again. She didn't reply, but her hand inched closer to her sketchbook. That was enough. He left the hospital with one decision made. He wouldn't protect his reputation anymore. He'd protect her. That evening, Mr. Lawson stood before a row of flashing cameras outside the mansion. No press team. No cue cards. Just him. My name is Daniel Lawson. I am the legal father of Zaya Lawson, and I want the world to know what happened. Not just the crime, but the failure before it. I didn't see my daughter's pain because I was too wrapped in my own detachment. I ignored her warnings, her instincts, and her voice. For that, I take full responsibility. A reporter shouted, "Do you regret the adoption?" Lawson's eyes narrowed. Regret? No. I regret not becoming a father sooner. I regret being too blind to recognize the kind of courage it takes for a child who survived abandonment, racism, and abuse to scream loud enough for someone like me to finally hear. The clip went viral overnight. But the real change wasn't in the headlines, it was at the hospital. When Lawson returned later that night, he found Zaya sitting upright, sketchbook open on her lap. She looked up at him. "You told the truth," she asked quietly. "I did." She nodded, then slid the sketchbook toward him. On the page was a drawing of a lion standing protectively in front of a lamb. Below it, she had written, "Real love shows up when it's hardest." Lawson sat beside her and didn't speak. He didn't need to. For the first time, silence wasn't empty, it was safe. The weeks that followed weren't easy, but they were real. Zaya returned to the mansion under a different kind of silence, not one born of distance or fear, but of cautious healing. The security system was upgraded, half the household staff was replaced, and Stephen's name was never spoken aloud again. Martha remained, of course, more protective than ever, her soft presence anchoring the house with something close to peace. Mr. Lawson transformed too, in ways that surprised even himself. The man who once spent 14 hours a day at the office now picked up Zaya from school. He traded boardrooms for backyard walks and briefcases for brown paper art supply bags. He'd sit beside her while she sketched, not asking questions, just existing next to her, finally learning her rhythm. They started small, sharing jokes, baking cookies badly, and watching old cartoons on the couch, where Zaya slowly began to lean into his side instead of sitting stiffly apart. One Sunday morning, Lawson entered the kitchen in pajama pants and a t-shirt, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. Zaya was already there, legs tucked under her, sketchbook in her lap. "You look normal," she teased, raising an eyebrow. He chuckled. "Well, don't tell Forbes. It'll ruin my image." She smirked and took the cocoa, their fingers brushing briefly. That small moment, a casual gesture between a father and daughter, was more intimate than 1,000 signed documents. They started therapy together. At first, Zaya barely spoke, but over time the walls softened. She talked about being bounced around foster homes, about never being picked, about how the silence of rich people scared her more than any argument. Lawson listened, really listened, not to fix, not to respond, just to understand. And slowly, Zaya began to believe what she had never dared to hope. She was not a burden in his life. She was part of it. At school, the story had changed too. Where once the whispers were cruel, now they were curious, some admiring, others unsure. But Zaya had grown. She no longer shrank when eyes turned toward her. She stood straighter, sharper, and when Camille passed her in the hallway one afternoon and muttered, "Still playing the victim, I see," Zaya didn't flinch. She calmly turned and said, "I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor, and you don't scare me anymore." Her voice carried. After art class that day, her teacher pulled her aside and said, "You've got something rare, Zaya. You don't just draw scenes, you draw truth." Zaya smiled faintly. "I lived it," she replied. At home, her drawings began to shift, no longer heavy with shadows and cages. Now they featured gardens, open doors, and bridges. One showed a man and a girl standing back to back, holding each other up. Another showed a lion resting, not fighting. One night, after dinner, Zaya handed Lawson a folded page. "You can open it now," she said. Inside was a sketch of the two of them planting a tree together, roots intertwining beneath their feet. At the top, in soft handwriting, it read, "Family isn't who's there at the beginning, it's who chooses to stay." He didn't speak, his eyes said everything. They planted a real tree the following weekend, just a small sapling in the far corner of the garden. As they patted soil around the roots, Lawson looked at her and said, "Next spring it'll bloom." Zaya glanced up at him, dirt smudged on her cheek. "So will we," she said, and for the first time he believed it too. Spring came softly that year, earlier than usual, as if the world itself was eager to start over. In the back corner of the mansion's sprawling garden, the sapling Zaya and Mr. Lawson had planted stood a little taller, its first buds gently blooming under the morning sun. Beside it, a newly installed wooden bench bore a small bronze plaque that read simply, "Where we grew." Zaya sat there now, sketchbook in hand, legs crossed, jacket zipped up to her chin. Her drawings were different these days, lighter, freer. She no longer drew cages or faceless figures. Now there were open fields, sunrises, people dancing barefoot under starlight. And at the heart of many of them, two unmistakable figures: a young girl with braids and a tall man in a suit standing side by side. Behind her, Mr. Lawson approached quietly, two mugs in hand, cocoa as always. He handed one to her without a word and sat beside her. No tie, no phone, just a father and daughter watching something grow. "It's blooming," she said after a while, nodding at the tree. "Just like you said." He smiled. "So are you." There was a long silence, but this one didn't ache, it rested peacefully between them. Finally, Zaya closed her sketchbook and looked at him. "Do you ever think about before," she asked, "what if I never screamed that night? What if you didn't come?" He nodded slowly. "I think about it every day. And every day, I thank God you did scream. That I did hear it. That we got a second chance." Zaya hesitated, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a sealed envelope. "I wrote something," she said, "for court, about Stephen. They wanted my statement. But it turned into more than that." Lawson took it gently. "Do you want me to read it?" "Not now," she said softly, "but one day, when you need to remember who you became." He nodded, understanding deeper than words. "I will." They sat for a while longer, sipping cocoa and watching a bird hop around the blooming branches. Then Zaya broke the quiet with a sudden thought. "Hey, can we do something weird today?" Lawson raised an eyebrow. "Define weird." "Like drive out to the beach. Just us. And paint. Not sketch. Paint. On real canvas. Like artists." He laughed, loud and unguarded. "We'll need supplies." "I've got a list," she grinned, pulling out a folded sheet with items like ocean blue acrylic, portable easel, and don't forget snacks. Her handwriting was still a little shaky, but confident. "Then it's a date," he said. They stood, walking toward the house. Not fast, not slow, just together. And as they disappeared inside, a breeze rustled through the branches of the young tree behind them, scattering petals that danced in the air like confetti. Later that evening, in the golden glow of sunset, a new sketch appeared in Zaya's book, a girl standing on a beach, her arms wide open as waves crashed behind her. Beside her, a man with paint-splattered hands held up a canvas. The sky above them was filled with stars, some real, some imagined. Below it, she wrote the final words of her journey: "He didn't save me. He saw me. And together, we saved each other."